Good day everyone, I am Michael, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is Controlling Hazards in Species. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, John Rand. Dr. John Rand is the president of randsystems.com and holds a PhD in research and statistical methods. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, John.
All right, thanks, Michael. Welcome, folks. Now, this is really an important webinar because if you do any cooking, you know that you add spices to the food, right? And so those spices, because of the nature of collecting spices and processing spices, become quite dangerous to a great extent. In one regard, people are allergic to a lot of spices, and they don't know what spices are in the food that they're eating, the processed food or manufactured food, whatever it is. And so not all that food's labeled, right? So we're going to talk about those things today. And we're going to start, a little bit at the farm. And then we're going to talk about how those spices come in and how we need to test them and a number of other issues. We're going to talk about allergens, and how spices really are allergens. We're going to start with the idea that you have to define your spice chain. And then we also have to have a system to collect different kinds of data. Recall as an example. We have to have particular planning for spices, and we have to establish valid preventive controls. We're going to talk about whole genome sequencing, a new kind of spice testing. And then here's where the money bugs come in, all right? Humidity, air handling, dust, pest sanitation, processing zones, etc. all have to be carefully controlled, so that's big bucks. And so spices have to be included in preventive control plans under preventive control planning for the FDA. So because spices generally are dry, right? It's considered a low water activity food industry. Well, whole genome sequencing came around 10 or 15 years ago. And the idea was that in order to test, we could look at the genetic structure of not only the spices, but the type of stuff that might be carried in them. Okay, and so that could be tracked, mapped out. Okay, so whole genome sequencing, genome tracking is used to identify the food contaminants. Right? So sources, bacteria, chemicals, which we get from pesticides, etc., and physical contaminants, which a lot of it comes in spices, dirt, wood, glass, wood chips, etc. And recall, the numbers we're supposed to be capturing. Food safety planning and spice operations. Most companies that are small spice companies have the receiving, packing, and shipping areas all in one area. That's a bad issue. Do we use ethylene oxide or propylene oxide to kill bacteria? One of the filter systems, air filter systems, is people working in a work environment, going into a cleaning zone, the prep area. Okay, so let's talk about some different kinds of high-risk foods. We're going to look at your spice list, the ones you add to your meatloaf that you're making in your factory or whatever it is, or you can go to FDA high risk. And then you also need a PCQI certification. Okay, the hazard evaluation, so includes the process evaluation of the pathogens whenever a ready-to-eat food is exposed to the environment prior to packaging, and the packaged food does not receive treatment or otherwise include a control measure. So and then you look at the formulation of the food, the condition, function, and design of the facility with raw materials coming in and other ingredients. How the food is transported covers, spices have to be covered in that as well. And current good manufacturing processes. Spices are allergens. Now let's shift over and just think a little bit differently. And so we have these allergen issues. 9 foods account for 90% of all food allergic reactions. Food allergic reactions, okay? The impact of eating allergens, on a person, because their health, their age, how much they eat, it's their condition. Food allergen labeling and Consumer Protection Acts. So the generation of dust or aerosols containing the allergen. Food processing or spice repackaging. Failure to disinfect after running process with allergen preventive controls. So now I've got an entire process just for cleaning. Let's talk about prevention. Here's a set of bins and trays and whatnot that are used to move product. Could be spices, could be vegetables from one area to another. So the problem with allergens is we don't always know where they are. Okay, the Consumer Protection Act of 2000 and Food added labeling requirements. So let's look at cross-contact hazards, bacteria, salmonella, E. coli, pathogens of concern in low water activity foods and spices. Microbial pathogens detected, I can't read it all because types of filth contaminants found in spices, surveillance sampling of spice shipments offered for U.S. entry, 2007 to 2009. Here we're finding, okay, let's talk about the supply chain. Here's a slide you should make a copy of for yourself. Let's talk about traceability. Look at this process. How many handoffs, how many potential spots for dirt and contaminant to get in there. Okay, there's another part to all this. Subpart G, under the preventive controls for human food, the supply chain program, preventing the potential of supply chain hazards from entering the food supply chain. The new rule requires 33 different kinds of sections intended to establish what food receivers must do to comply. And either you do it or you hire somebody to verify them. So what's an approved spice supplier? That supplier has done a hazard analysis of the food, and they have food safety controls and transportation practices. You're the receiving facility. You must approve and only use approved suppliers. And you must establish and implement non-supplier entity. Could be like an audit company, okay? Talk about recalls of spices. There's an example, spices in secret recipes, touching on sanitation. So you're going to have procedures, practices, and processes to ensure that the facility is maintained in sanitary condition adequately to significantly minimize or prevent hazards such as environmental pathogens, bacterial hazards due to employee handling, or food allergen hazards. You're going to find food allergen hazards throughout preventive controls. Sanitation basics, there's disinfectant sanitizers. Do not contaminate the food with disinfectants when sanitizers should be used. So we're going to get into how do we monitor this overall environment. Environmental pathogens surviving and persisting within a manufacturing holding facility, as well as the instruments and controls must be precise and accurate. In other words, you have to calibrate them. I'm going to touch on preventive controls for a minute. Preventive controls are different than corrective actions. Prevention is a totally different thing. Recall does not prevent the event from recurring. So what do you need? You need to validate preventive controls. Okay, you have to validate prevention. Validation includes obtaining and evaluating scientific and technical evidence or conducting studies to determine whether the preventive controls, when properly implemented, will effectively control the hazards. So in other words, you're going to have to show me you know where that variation came from. Validation means you have proved you have implemented an effective food safety program and not just comply with the rules. And control outcome variables are 0 or showing continuous improvement. Now, the FDA, under its PCQI training, has developed some forms. Start food safety planning and repackaging, procedure, data, when done, how often. Thanks for attending today. Hope to see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, John, for the great presentations. So that does conclude the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.